Old Man Sarge. I haven't recorded any videos for a very long time on this channel regarding my gaming, my hobby of playing war games of various kinds. A lot of things happen in my life, good things, so they're not bad, they're good things, and they just kind of pulled me away from that, and I just wasn't able to keep up or really do anything because literally everything changed. Anyway, as far as gaming goes, I've been trying to get back into gaming, and I've been doing a painting for a lot of miniatures for ancients, and I did this because I figured, you know, I can't really game, I might as well paint, because I could paint for a couple hours every 2 or 3 days or something. And so I just thought, you know what, I'll just plan ahead and I'll paint, and then once I kind of get my life kind of, you know, settled and situated, then I will I'll get back in and actually be able to put some games out. So I haven't played that many other games, but I have played like 3 different games since my last video, which was probably 2 or 3 years ago. The main thing that I'm doing is ancient wargaming. I've always enjoyed, this is Hail Caesar, by the way, I kind of took it away quickly, but wargaming has always been one of the most interesting things. Ancient wargaming has been one of the most interesting things for me. I really liked fantasy, but I've always wanted to get involved in ancient wargaming. The problem is my community here is small. It's fairly small, and there isn't a ton of people. And so most of the people around here were playing either 40K or they were playing fantasy at the time. And so when I wanted to play a miniatures war game, I would play fantasy because it was the closest thing to historical wargaming. So I played that game, and I enjoyed it. You know, I had a number of armies, I still do. And then they killed that game and they came out with Age of Sigmar, which is more of a skirmish game. And I really didn't like, I mean, it's not like that I didn't like Age of Sigmar, it's just I'm not really into a skirmish game. And it kind of took away that whole ranking thing and moving blocks of soldiers as you would have done or as you would have been in an ancient battle system. It wasn't like a skirmish setup, typically. And so I played it for a while, but I just kind of like slowly stopped playing it. And then I completely quit because it just wasn't my kind of game. 40K is the game that's currently played almost like with, I don't know, I can probably say 20 people around my area that play it, and this is not a great big huge area. It's getting bigger, but it's not a great big area. And so I do play 40K because I want to socialize with people. I do have some friends that will play Ancients wargaming, but they don't want to do their own like models or paint. They don't want to spend the time for that. And so what I've been doing is I've been doing all the painting of all the different factions and armies, trying to get a fully, like 2 fully painted armies that I can put on the field. But it takes a long time because we're talking hundreds of miniatures on each side for an Ancients war game. The other problem that I had was trying to find a system, a battle system that I liked. And at first I went with the default game system, which is Hail Caesar, because it was the only one that I knew about, and it's not a horrible system, it's not bad. It's kind of enjoyable in a lot of cases, especially with multiple people on each side. It scales really well, and I'll go into this in a little bit, but there was always some kind of problem with it. It always seemed to be like it would kind of like get stuck at some point. And it's the same thing with the Black Powder game. To me, it seemed like it kind of got stuck. It's like it flows fairly well, and then once you go into combat with each other, it just kind of gets, I don't know how to explain it, kind of jumbled, and like you're constantly looking at the rule book. And here's the other thing I'm going to say about the different kinds of games that you can play out there. So in the 80s, where I generally started playing games, and in the 90s, there was a lot of war games out there and a lot of different kinds of board games and things like that. But there was a lot of record keeping in all these games. And unless you played that particular game like a number of times, and you had people that you played it with a number of times, it became kind of like, even if you liked that game, it kind of felt like I have to pick up the rules and read the rules thoroughly, like 2 days prior to playing the game, and then even when I play the game, I've got the rule book out and I'm looking up rules. You know, I'm trying to, like, you know, make sure, you know, you can do this or you can't do that, or what happens if that happens. You know, especially on like little things. And one of the biggest games that I'll point out that 100% is like this is an old game called Squad Leader, which was very detailed. And so, yeah, you got a lot of detail out of the game and a lot of meat, but you had to play that game constantly, and you had to have opponents that played it constantly to really like play the game. Because otherwise what you're doing is, and it was always said this way, you're playing the rules. Because you didn't know the rule. I didn't know that rule. I didn't know that rule. Maybe next time I'll remember that. And it's like, when you get older and you have a family and things like that, you don't have a ton of time to put into, like, you know, maybe if you're just going to play one game system or something, maybe it's fine. But now on the other end of the spectrum is a game like checkers. So checkers is the exact opposite, right? You can put the game out, you can teach somebody within like 10 minutes how to play it, or 5 minutes, and you can play a few games of checkers. But it doesn't have any meat, and it doesn't feel like anything. And even if you replace those checkers with blocks of infantry or something, it would still be kind of just like, why are we playing with blocks of infantry? It's just a basic game. And so when it comes to gaming, you're looking for a game system that fits a few different things, that accomplishes a few different things for the players. And one of the main things is the detail. You want detail in that game. You want things to feel like they would feel like, the infantry to feel like they are, the cavalry. You want the generals to feel like they might, you know, how they would on the battlefield. You kind of want it all to make sense, like how you visually think that battle would have taken place doesn't make sense. And at the end of those conflicts, hopefully you've gotten to that point where it makes sense. But at the same time, you don't want it so complicated and so involved that it takes you like forever to learn the rules, and then you have to keep playing it, otherwise you forget them. And if you do, and you play casually with another person who doesn't really play a lot, then that person's like, you know, like, I'm playing the rules. And so that's the second bad thing, is that you don't want it so complicated. So where do you go? I mean, you want it meaty enough and a lot of like depth to the game, but then you don't want it so complex. Well, the answer to me, at least, came, and I'm sure everybody's got a happy medium on this, but the answer to me really came in the 2000s. I don't know if it was like 2005 or 2010. I don't know exactly when it occurred. But somewhere along the line, especially with board games, what they started doing was they started designing board games with all of the mechanics behind the scenes. Like, these board game designers, they were very different than the board game designers of the 80s and 90s, where those board game designers, they would design a game and there would be all this record keeping, you know, keeping track of this and this and this and this. Maybe you have little dials on the table, but a lot of times you would actually write stuff on a piece of paper and keep track of it. Well, the newer board games, the designers are trying, they know what the problems are, and so they're trying to design a game that solves these mechanical things behind the scenes where you don't see them. So they're just kind of naturally there. Now you're playing the strategy and the tactics of the game. And so that kind of revolution that took place in board games, and everything kind of was going to computers at the time, and it was kind of amazing to me that it was going computerized, and I did play computer games like Total War, Rome, and things like that. But then there's these board games that just kind of like came out of nowhere with these game designers that were almost like designing these games like a computer behind the scenes, only there's no computer. It's just the mechanics of the game inside of the game makes it really fun. and not much record keeping, and you can play it casually. You just got to refresh the rules just a little bit. And that's what I was looking for in a miniatures Ancients war game as well, is trying to find that. Now, so the first one I picked up was Hail Caesar, because it's the one that people know of the most. But this is kind of, and like I said, a gaming system that is still kind of from the 90s. I'm not saying it is from the 90s. They've done upgrades to it. This is the second edition, I think. I don't remember which edition this is, but the second probably. Yep. No, I don't know. I don't know if it tells me in here. They just say, it just says Hail Caesar. It doesn't say second edition or anything on it. But I think that, I'm pretty sure this is the second edition. So they've made some changes to it. But it's still, you know, involved. And I'm not saying it's bad. And a lot of people still play it. A lot of people still in Britain, 100%. But there's some other game systems out there. One of them is called Mortem et Gloriam. This one right here that I haven't actually tried. So Mortem et Gloriam is another Ancients gaming system that has this kind of push mechanic. But every time I sit down and start reading the rules on this, it becomes pretty obvious to me that it's a pretty involved, like, learning of how the rules work. And so every time I picked it up and started looking at the rule systems, I've kind of put it away. The other reason is that this game was initially designed, although it seems agnostic, but it was kind of initially designed at 15 millimeter. Another gaming system out there, but I know you can play 28 on it, so don't get me wrong. I know you can play 28 millimeter on it, but I think a lot of the people who play with this system are playing with 15 millimeter. Then there's another game called Sword Point, and Sword Point is another gaming system that I think has a lot of meat to it, but I haven't been able to get into it. But it has, you know, some pretty in-depth rules in it on how you do things in the game. Then there is, well, I got this one here called Wars of the Republic by Osprey Games. And it's another game that I haven't tried out yet. So I've only really tried out Hail Caesar. And I tried out another game called Age of Hannibal because the guys from Little Wars TV, they upgraded a gaming system they played with a long time ago. And they played with it. And I like it. My friends like it. It definitely fits the bill for being one of the easiest ones to start playing. The game feels kind of like you would for Ancients, but it also seems a little bit dry, and that may be because the designers of the game, they want to make it as accessible as possible to people, and they don't have a staff that's like writing lists or anything like that, and upgrading lists and adding new factions or whatever. They've got 4 or 5 ancient lists, and that's kind of it. And it seems like, you know, and even those lists don't have a ton of depth in them. So as far as the depth goes, and it just seems kind of a little bit on the dry side there. But I think the reason, as I said, is because they're trying to give stuff away free and things like that, and they're not really supporting the game, and they're not trying to make a profit off of it. And that's good, but at the same time, if you don't make a profit off your game, then you don't really have the money to put back into it to keep developing it and making it better. Maybe they think that it's never going to get, it doesn't need to be better, it's the top of the line. The other thing I'd say about Age of Hannibal is that it doesn't scale very well. And what I mean by that is if it's set for a specific type of points totals. So 2,000 points. If you play 1,000 points, they have like a reduction in that, right? So if you reduce it to 1,000 points, then the morale clock has changed a little bit. And but then if you go down to 500 points, it doesn't work at all. Like I played a game and my entire army was almost completely wiped out, and I still had morale left on my morale clock because my units were getting wiped out, and then he couldn't tick my morale clock down much more because they were gone. Like, it wasn't like they got hit, they rallied, then they got hit again, which is kind of how that morale is supposed to work. Instead, he was just blowing my units out. And so maybe it was just kind of a one-off game, but it just kind of seemed like for smaller points. And what about 3,000 points? So what I'm trying to suggest to you is the morale clock in Age of Hannibal seems to be set for a specific point total, and that morale clock is integral to the game, and it's very good, don't get me wrong, but the problem is it doesn't enable the game to be sized differently. You would have to change the rules of the morale clock in order to make it bigger or smaller than the point totals. And that is evidenced, by the way, in the fact that they actually do tell you to reduce the morale by 1 from, I think, 9 down to 8, and from some of the effects that happen at like 3 down to 2 or something like that. So they know it, so I'm not saying anything that they don't know. But that's one of the big advantages of Hail Caesar, for example, is it scales. There's really nothing wrong. You could play this game with 500, or their point systems are different, but let's say 100 points if you really wanted to. Or you could play this game at 1,000 points aside. This game scales very well, and so does Black Powder. They played Black Powder, which is the Napoleonic version of Hail Caesar. Similar system, but differences because they're using guns, and instead of just swords and spears and bows and things like that. But Black Powder they played, I think, in Scotland about 3 years ago with like the University of Scotland or something, and they played it with, I don't know how many people are on each side, but it had to be an enormous number of people, and they had tables lined up in rows, and effectively if you moved your units from one table to the next, then you would move them to the next row, and there must have been 20 people on each side, and that's how well Black Powder scales. So that's the big advantage of Black Powder and Hail Caesar. It's a really good game for scaling. There's nothing that in the mechanics of the game that holds it to a certain thing. These other games I don't know, but I do know that Age of Hannibal seems to have a scaling problem, and you're supposed to play it at 2,000. It has a depth problem, but the mechanics of the game are superior, in my opinion, to Hail Caesar. I can't speak for some of these other systems like Wargaming Glorium or Swordpoint, but it's superior to Hail Caesar, in my opinion. It flows really well. It seems like you have an end point and a goal. Hail Caesar is kind of like make up your own goal. It's kind of like here's a I don't know what you call it, but here's a cookie cutter, and then you decide what the goal of these games are. The problem is that you may not be able to balance it well if that's what you're trying to do, especially if you're one of the players playing one side or the other. Now, the game, though, that I have tried, or I haven't actually played, but I had a couple people, no, I actually played it, that I thought was fantastic was this game called To the Strongest. To the Strongest is a game, almost all these other games, they have dice, and they have measuring, like you do in Fantasy or 40K or these other miniature games. But this is the one strange game out there, the gaming system, that you don't use dice. They just grid the map out into these quadrants, and then your units move in these quadrants. And so, on one hand, the complaint against To the Strongest is that aesthetically, you can't really set your guys up in like different formations or whatever, because they're all blocks. It's like you're playing a board game. That's what the complaint is. That's the only complaint I've really heard about the game. But as far as the mechanics go and the scaling, it is absolutely fantastic. It makes sense. The victory conditions scale. along with the game. There's units in here that do particular things. Like, I'll give you an example. So skirmisher, and here's to me the brilliance of the game. And this is something that I've been trying to design in my own mind for ancient or for fantasy type battles. I've always wanted to design a game where you have energy, for example. I don't know what you call it. Energy, power, I don't know what. But it's basically like whatever mechanic you want to call it that allows your units to do a certain action of some kind. But you choose the action. So I always thought, like, you might have goblins that are fast, but maybe, you know, they don't hit very hard, which is kind of what everybody thinks of goblins to be like. So maybe they have a lot of energy, right? But they don't have a lot of power. And then you have, like, maybe humans that might have all these strategies and tactics instead of just a horde of goblins. And instead of just moving your guys in these phases, I just thought, well, let's come up with a game mechanic that allows you to do activations or use your energy. You can save your energy, you could use it. If you save your energy, you can act during the other player's turn, or when you turn it over to them, and then somehow you build up, you can rebuild some of your energy if you use it, you know, whatever. I had all these different ideas of how to kind of do that to make it flow well. Well, To the Strongest basically does that. So Simon Miller, the designer, has already accomplished what I was trying to do in my own mind. What he does is, instead of having phases like every single game out there, I don't care whether it's 40K or Fantasy or Fantasy of the Old World or any of these other Hail Caesar, they all have phases. You have your movement phase, you have your shooting phase, you have your morale phase, you have your, if you're playing a fantasy game, you have your magic phase. But To the Strongest doesn't have any of those phases. I think they have like maybe 3. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back through and review it again. But my feeling for the game I played, and I've only played one, was that you get to decide what you want to do. You want to move? Try to move. You want to stand there and shoot at your opponent? You stand there and shoot at your opponent. You want to retreat? You can retreat. You want to melee attack your opponent? You melee attack your opponent. They're all part of the same phase. You just decide what you're going to do with your activation. And what they do is, Wasp. What they do is, you draw, they play it with cards. Get out of here. They play it with cards, so they draw a card, and you need to beat a 2, and the cards are from 1 to 10. You draw a card, let's say you draw 3. Well, that's better than 1, so now you can activate that unit. And now you can go and activate a different unit in a different area, or you can activate that same unit if you really want to. But if you fail, then your turn's over with that general's command. Kind of like what Hail Caesar does. If you fail, you're done. That commander's finished, right? And that's what they do in this, and To the Strongest too. So you have this 3. Well, if I draw another card, I could draw a 2 or a 1, but this pretty low card, pretty good chance I'm going to be able to draw another card. So I'm going to do another action. I draw a 7. So now I do my other action, whatever it happened to be. And now I'm at a 7. Well, maybe I go do other things with other units and I come back to this one, because you can keep coming back to these units as long as you have not failed on your card draw. You have to be higher than the previous card. So now I have a 7, now I need an 8, 9, or a 10. The only time that you would not need something greater is if you're at 10, in which case you need a 10 again. And you can keep doing that. And you essentially have 80 cards that you can draw from this deck. And so it just allows you to push your luck. Do I want to get closer to the opponent right now? Do I want to stay back? Because if I get closer to them and then I fail my orders, now I'm exposed to them, right? Or if my whole army is kind of disjointed, I've exposed myself. And so there's all this thinking that you have to do, and that's really cool. It's part of the game. But what I was trying to explain earlier about this, the interesting thing that you can do in the game is you can do things like your skirmishers can move and then throw their javelins 1 square away, which makes sense. They can even move from behind a unit in the same square in front of them and throw their javelins. Bows, archers, can basically shoot and then move 1 away, or they can shoot twice. So it's really cool how they have devised the rules for the game to allow you to do extra things if you're lucky and maybe you want to just pass your turn to your opponent because you don't want to get yourself all exposed out there. Very, very good system in my opinion. Now, as far as the other games, well, I went to Kings of War because they killed fantasy. So I went to Kings of War, and what I did is I designed my Kingdoms of Men army, which is my Ancients army, or one of them, to be able to be used in Kings of War as well. Kings of War has specific size requirements. If you want to play against other people, they tell you in the very beginnings of these games that you have to have, like, you know, your frontages of your infantry, you know, 100 millimeters or 200 if you want a horde, you know. And so because you have to have that, I started devising my Ancients game with the same sort of frontages. So I had my spearman unit capable of being 200 millimeters wide. So that enabled me to basically have that have enough in that force to fight. Okay, so Kings of War is kind of the main driver. It allowed me to play games while I was building my Ancients armies up. And I even bought stuff off eBay to do it. So let's talk really quickly about the depth of the games. So the list making, which is half the fun that I think a lot of people have when they do wargaming, is making their lists. I remember in fantasy, people really liked the list building aspect of it, and I remember it in 40K, the same kind of thing. So some people really enjoy the list. I enjoyed playing the games more than list building, but list building was fine. Mortiment Glorium, I can't tell you anything about the list building because I haven't really delved into the game. I don't know how much support there is for lists. I just know that there's a really good, or supposedly a good, pushing aspect of it. Wars of the Republic from Osprey Games, I have absolutely no idea. This would probably be my last one that I would try out, but for how there actually is some list stuff in the very back here. Just talk about campaigns, your forces, historical scenarios. It has some battles in here, and it tells you kind of what kind of forces you have. I don't know if it tells you how many you're supposed to have. But anyway. Oh, here, I saw numbers in here, 0 to 3 and all that. Where did I see that? Here it is. So, End of the Republic. We'll have to have 1 legionary regular for the Marian Legion. But you can have militia, you can have veteran, you can have some archers. So there is a list building aspect to this. They also have it for the Gauls, the Illyrians. So, I mean, it's not bad, I don't think. The Scythians. It doesn't tell you, like, points. It doesn't give you a point system in here, though, that I can see. Or maybe there is a point system. Oh, it does have points. So there are points based off of every unit that you look at, like A veteran legion's 12 points. A regular legion's 10. His study is 8. So there's a point system there. Next, sword point. Sword point has a really good list system in here that I saw. So these are Dark Age armies, but then I got the classical armies and their list building. And what's cool about what these guys do, Sword Point, any of these game systems that have these supplements, and some people say, I've actually watched videos where people are on YouTube and they're saying, well, one of the downsides is that you have all these supplements, you know, all these separate books. And I'm like, I eat these separate books up. I love them because the separate books are specific to your time